Welcome to the September 17th, 2014 Airport Commission meeting. Call to order. Roll call, please.
Bruce Miller,
Here.
Kirk Martin.
Here.
Craig Arcuri,
Here.
Patricia Griffin.
Here.
Carl Hopkins.
Here.
Karen Kahn, Jim Wilson.
Here.
All right, thank you. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Public comment. Any member of the public may address the commission on any matter within its jurisdiction. Any comment slips? Any
No
speakers?
comment slips
All
or
right.
speaker slips? No.
Thank you. Notices that on Thursday, September 11th at 5:30 p.m., the Airport Commission Secretary duly posted this agenda on the bulletin board. And minutes, we have a recommendation to waive the reading and approve the minutes. Do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion. Second.
All right, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, minutes approved. Thank you. Consent calendar, looks like 2 lease agreements, Rivera Concrete and Paysage, I believe it is, and the property management report. Any changes to the consent?
Changes.
Motion.
Move we approve.
Second.
Right, in favor of approving the consent as presented?
Aye.
All right, opposed? All right, thank you, consent approved. Liaison reports, it does look like we have our City of Santa Barbara liaison, Councilmember Frank Hotchkiss. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, everybody. Good news, in one sense, although the drought continues, city goal was to reduce consumption or use of water by 20%, and the public hit the 25% figure, which is pretty impressive. How much more there is there, how much more fat we can cut, very questionable. We are in the process of looking at other sources of water, obviously desal being top of the list, and we will shortly go out with the requests for proposals. The key date is about 9 months from now, April, when it'll be a go or no-go. And hopefully we will see by then some rainfall, but that is perhaps, unfortunately, wishful thinking. We're losing somebody really important. Our city administrator, Jim Armstrong, who's been with us since 2001, has been a very even-handed, strong, great negotiator, good administrator, reduced the size of city government by about 10% when he was asked to. It's tough to shrink, like it's tough to diet, but he did it. And Paul Casey's been named the interim administrator. We had such success with looking for our new city attorney, Ariel Colon, that we've asked the same group to undertake a nationwide search. I think it'll probably be more like California-wide because we have such particular needs here. But that will be ongoing. In fact, it started already. I think that's all I've got to say, but it's nice to see you all again. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for joining us. And it looks like we do not have our Goleta liaison, so we will move on to item 7, a contract for construction of runway 15 left 33 right terminal ramp, general aviation ramps, rehabilitation.
Yes. Tonight we have Leif Reynolds, the airport project engineer. He's going to give you a presentation on this particular project, which is one of our recent FAA grants. So, Leif?
Thank you, Hazel. Good afternoon, fellow airport commissioners. It's nice to be here. I haven't been here for
Long time.
a long time, so nice to see you all. Hazel asked me to come in and give a short presentation on this project and the grant itself, so that's why I am here. We are going to be working all over the airport, as the title implies, runway 15 left 33 right, terminal ramp, south GA ramp, and the north GA ramp. Oop. There we go. So we'll start out talking about the budget. The budget for the project, it is being funded by FAA Grant 47. This grant provides a 90.66 match for us, and we're at 9.34% at the airport. FAA total amount of the grant is $2.603 million. It also includes some 4 lighted X's, which are not part of this project, but that's in the grant as well. The contract is with Granite Construction in the total dollar amount of $2,164,000 and change. Project timeline, we started on the project quite a while ago. In 2012, we did an RFQ for both runways 15 right and 15 left. You may recall we did an overlay on 15 right last year. The design contract for 15 left was executed with the engineering firm Kimley Horn in February of 2014. We received our project bids in July of 2014. We got the contracts executed in August of 2014, and we plan to start on October 5th, 2014. The duration is short. We plan on being complete by January, hopefully December. There's several areas of work, as I mentioned. The first is to crack and slurry seal runway 15 left. You know, flying on it, driving on it, you don't see the cracks very well, but if you inspect it carefully, there are a lot of cracks. So we will be crack sealing and then slurry sealing the entire runway. We will also be working on the signature apron, and you don't need to look hard for failures in the signature apron because the Portland cement concrete is in very poor condition. We've replaced a lot of it in the past, but as you all know, there's a lot of ramp out there. So we're basically going after the worst condition ramp, replacing about 7,000 square feet of that in this project.
And Leaf, isn't that the ramp that the military put in?
That's right. It's the original ramp, so it's 70-plus years old. And the current ramp is about 6 inches thick concrete. Our new section is 13 inches. As you can see, we have these 1.25-inch dowels at all of our joints, so it's a much sturdier section that we're putting in, and hopefully it will last for the duration. That's the plan, at least. We are also crack and slurry sealing the Atlantic ramp. So basically from the sea to south line, if you guys know where that is, right where the car rental return lot is, from right there all the way to the south. So we're going around all the hangars down there. It will be fun for Aaron because he will have to move his aircraft to one side of the ramp one day, and then he'll have to move them all back to the other side in a couple other days. So logistically, it'll be kind of tough for him, but I think it'll work out. We also have some crack seal there. We're unfortunate to have a earthquake fault running pretty much right through the Atlantic building there, and it runs diagonally across the concrete ramp. It's really easy to spot because it's this diagonal crack, and it's up to 3 inches wide, and it runs all the way to Taxiway Bravo. We've repaired it out there before, but we've never actually addressed this crack. We've just watched it grow over the years, so we'll be addressing this crack on the Atlantic ramp as well. Finally, on the terminal apron, we are going to be grinding a portion of the asphalt. This is basically from Taxiway Alpha to the South CETA line. It's in between Taxiway Bravo and the new terminal ramp. And this portion of the ramp was last replaced about 20 years ago. And since that time, there has been no work on it. So other than some surface cracking, it's in good shape. So we're just going to grind down 3 inches and repave. We are also doing the same procedure at the 15 left run-up area. That was also paved about 20 years ago, but it only has 3 inches of asphalt there. So it's in really bad shape. And we're taking that out and rebuilding the structural section there completely. Finally, the project phasing. We've worked with the tower quite a lot to get the phasing down. We don't just go in and say, you know, we're doing it this way. We go meet with the tower several times, Tracy and I, and we make it work as best as possible for them. So in this case, of course, we're going to start with the terminal apron just to get that done. That's only about a week's worth of work. It's not too bad. But the real phasing issue for the tower and the airport is the 15 left slurry seal. And what we worked out with them is basically 2 phases. And basically the blue area is one phase where we take, you know, across Charlie up to Hotel and slurry seal. And then at the same time, the tower has allowed us to take taxiway Alpha all the way down to Mike Echo. At first, we proposed doing this in 4 phases, but they thought that they could circulate traffic on the open taxiways of Echo, Mike, and Hotel, and it will greatly reduce the length of our project to be able to go from one phase slurry sealing just to jump right over to the next. So we'll do the blue phase first. That'll probably take 2 or 3 weeks because we have to remove the paint, then we crack seal, then we slurry seal, then we repaint. Once all that's done, we'll go to the red or pink phase. That's the Hotel, Mike Echo, all the way down to Lima phase. Once we get all of that done, we'll open the runway back up, and then we'll jump over to the Atlantic ramp and start the slurry seal over there. That's the end of my presentation. If you guys have any questions on it, I'm happy to try to answer.
Could that diagram be handed out and/or put on the website so that pilots can have some idea?
Sure.
And NOTAMs will be issued, correct? I mean, for each phase of it, so certainly, but yes, it could be.
When you say hand it out, the website's quite easy. What else did you have in mind?
If you have copies, I'll take one tonight. But if you've got it on the website, that's fine too.
Sure. I'll make a copy and I'll leave it right here for you.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So, doing the Atlantic ramp work, will the hangar tenants in there have alternate lodging, or how is that going to impact those?
No, they will not have alternate lodging. What Aaron will do is coordinate with each of them, and if they need to move in the 2 or 3 days we're in front of their hangar, they need to move before we get there.
Okay.
The slurry seal on a day like today will dry in 2 to 4 hours. So if they really needed to, they could get out in a few hours. But we're asking everyone to move if they need to move in those 2 or 3 days before we get there.
Good. Questions? I know it's riveting, but
You've planned in rain delay into your schedule as well?
Absolutely.
And I'm not being facetious because you were planning it at a couple of the rainy months.
That's right. We just got our grant from the FAA, August 5th? Seems later than that. So you're right. We are doing it at the end of, or in the fall, early winter. We'd prefer to do it earlier in the summer, but we just got the grant, so this is when we need to do it.
And how is this going to affect like the holiday travel? Because this is, you said in December?
We're hoping to have it done actually just before Thanksgiving.
So it probably won't at all.
It probably won't at all unless we get that deluge of rain, which Councilmember Hotchkiss was talking about.
Even if that project is going during the holidays, it
Okay.
should not cause any air carrier delays.
Super.
Good to hear.
all right. Any questions on this item? All right. Well, thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Item 8, the
Thank you.
Wildlife Hazard Assessment and Wildlife Hazard Management Plan Update.
This is riveting also. This is the second part of the grant that we received from FAA this year. And Andrew Vermont, our airport project planner, will make the presentation.
Good evening, Airport Commission, and thank you, Hazel. This project, I will go into a little bit about the purpose and need of a wildlife hazard management plan, why airports prepare one, what's changed since the last one that we prepared, which was 10 years ago now, 2004. I'll talk a little bit about bird strike risk and why that's important to us, and then I'll get into more detail about both the purpose of the wildlife hazard assessment and how that's different from a wildlife hazard management plan. And then I'll also talk a little bit about the funding and the contract. So the purpose of this process is to identify where aviation and wildlife have conflicts, to try to avoid those conflicts where they can't be avoided, to try to find opportunities to minimize those conflicts, either through changing human behavior or changing wildlife behavior. And also, we are doing this because it is an obligation for air carrier airports under the Airport Certification Manual, and you can cite chapter and verse there. This is something that we need to keep maintained, and we need to update in the event of any qualifying events, is the language in the law, and that's a bird strike of note, a significant bird strike, or significant changes in the environment. And I think that we've had a little bit of both of those, and I'll get into that a bit further later. So the changes in the past 10 years have actually been really quite significant to the environment. We've had, first of all, we've created new 1,000-foot runway safety areas on either side of the runway, of our main instrument runway. And we've relocated 2 creeks. We've restored 40 acres of wetland habitat, including 13 acres which were restored to tidal flows from their previous freshwater seasonal function. And and that's kind of been undone now with the change in condition at the slough mouth, because instead of having access to tidal flows year-round, it is only when the mouth is naturally opened that the slough is tidal. So we are pursuing a mouth management program, and I'll present more on that in a future meeting, but that is something that we're actively pursuing so that we can have greater control over the water levels when we have extreme flood events or extreme changes in wildlife attractants. And wildlife strikes are a very important thing to airports because it's primarily at or around airports where they occur. That's where the aircraft is coming through the range in the air that birds typically like to use, the first 100 feet or so. And not all bird strikes are the same. We're very fortunate in that we have mostly small birds, swallows and sparrows, that comprise our strikes. Every once in a while we'll have something a little bit larger, but we've had very few ducks and geese strikes, which are the most significant hazard in the air. Deer is the most dangerous wildlife strike in the United States, but we don't have that problem. We've had 2 events where an aircraft has been grounded briefly so that it could be inspected and repaired, and those were in 2009 and 2012. One was an air carrier, U.S. Airways, with 70 people on board, and the other was U.S. Air Force Boeing 737 carrying the Vice President and the Second Lady. And I've got some photographs of those. They did not pose any threat to the function of the aircraft, but it's again something that we take very seriously, and is something that can be cause for concern especially if these sorts of things happen more often. Fortunately, our history doesn't show that, with the exception of when we do construction, and that's when we're tearing up large areas of either grassland or wetland to either do a restoration project or the runway relocation project, and we disrupt bird behavior significantly. We end up with more birds, I guess, searching for somewhere else to go, and that involves the potential for bird strikes, and that's something that we've sort of learned by trial and error in how we can minimize that in the future. But with the exception of those construction years, we have a pretty significant downward trend between the airfield safety projects and the tidal restoration work. Although we had 1 more bird strike yesterday, so that number is already out of date on my chart. So the wildlife hazard assessment is going to be a year-long, twice-monthly bird survey. We'll look at 20 points, both on and within 5 miles of the airfield, so it's really quite comprehensive. We will be doing the time of day for the surveys will be randomized, so we're not always looking in the morning or always looking at 3 in the afternoon when all the birds are down at the beach or whatever. And we'll also be doing 4 night surveys. We'll have some camera installations, which will do large mammal and small mammal surveys, and we'll also be taking a look at our aircraft operations to see if there's any opportunities that we can change human behavior to avoid wildlife strikes. So this is a little plot point of the areas that are under consideration. That's actually more than 20 points. We'll be trimming that down a little bit, but those are the areas that we've identified as potential wildlife attractants that could be of a concern within the 5-mile radius. Most of them are clustered around the airport, and the Goleta Slough being the most obvious of those. Following that work, we will prepare a wildlife hazard management plan that's based on the analysis in the assessment, and that will direct airport staff from airport patrol, airport maintenance, capital planning to implement strategies that will either avoid wildlife conflicts or minimize them through habitat modification, changing the frequency or time of year for mowing, hazing, which includes the very expensive but attractive falconer there, or just either educating the public, things like dumpsters, keeping those closed so you don't attract seagulls, and educating pilots and air traffic control about different implementation strategies that we can employ.
So educating the wildlife is not.
So far, that's not, well, that's kind of what hazing is, in a sort of cruel way. Running, we put on the airport patrol siren and, you know, makes loud noises to try to discourage them from the area, and the smart ones learn and stay out. So we've selected Dudek as the lead on our consultant team to prepare this work, similar to the project that you just heard about from Leaf. The project is 90.66% funded by the FAA, so that airport portion's quite modest, and the measures that we identify in the wildlife hazard management plan would be theoretically airport improvement program grant eligible, so we could actually have a funding source for those planned projects. And we had a nice little event back in July where Lois Capps came to celebrate our award of this grant, so I included this picture. As you can see, it's about $13,000 of airport funds to prepare this, and $133,000 project, so that's really a really quite modest obligation for the airport. So that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm terribly sorry. I've always wondered how you count birds and don't count the same one twice.
There's as much art as there is science to that. What you do is you stay in a particular spot for about 20 minutes, and you can observe them either by sight or by listening to them. And the count isn't per se a perfect number, but it's an order of magnitude number.
Uh-huh.
And ornithologists train in this and pay attention to their movement. Generally speaking, if they're quiet, they don't move that much. You know,
So you may miss them entirely.
Well, possibly, but what you'd like to do is observe them while they're on the ground, because they're easier to count that way, or observe them by listening for their calls.
So are these professional bird counters that do this?
Yes, and that's a very good question. Not only have we contracted with professional ornithologists who are wildlife biologists with expertise in bird surveys, but they're also qualified under the FAA's Wildlife Biologist Program to conduct a wildlife hazard assessment. So it's a very specific certification that very few wildlife biologists have. And it's a little bit of an elite group, I guess, that's a part of that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any plans to do anything concerning the opening and closing of the slough, or just let nature take its course?
Well, at the moment, it's subject to nature's whim, but the long-term plan for the airport is to identify the most environmentally acceptable slough mouth opening strategy, and that involves a number of wildlife surveys, particularly fish surveys, that we're currently undertaking for steelhead trout and the tidewater goby, both of which are federally endangered species. And if we do an opening of the mouth that results in one or two of those fish dying, that is a big deal. And so we need to make sure that we can identify that we're doing the best we can to not threaten any of those endangered species when we do the mouth opening. And that's frankly why it's discontinued, is because the Flood Control District wasn't able to answer the questions that the regulatory agencies were asking about those species.
I believe you gave us a presentation on that about 6 months ago, I think.
Correct.
A
And-
number of issues.
And we'll
involved
bring
in that.
back the report once we have more data collected, because you're collecting now, correct?
That's right. We're in the middle of doing surveys, and we're trying to formulate a project description where we'll identify how much water is too much water for the safety of the airport, and also how much water is too little water for the safety of the endangered species, and hopefully devise a program. When we have something to present, we'll be bringing that forward.
Any other questions?
Do we have much of an incidence of foxes making it onto the airport, or is that unheard of?
We have had fox findings, yes. It's not very common. I think coyote is the
Coyotes.
small mammal
Coyotes,
that
right.
we have most often, but we also have foxes, yes.
And so do we keep track of that separately from bird strikes, or is it?
Yes, we'll be doing both small and large mammal surveys that will identify their presence, and we'll be putting the cameras at the critical points of travel along creeks, and we have a bridge crossing, basically, that's the sanitary district pipe, and we'll want to monitor that overnight, and with the infrared cameras you can just kind of leave those out there, and they just go to download the data and recharge the battery. It's a pretty minimal effort, but we get this, massive amount of data for it.
Thank you.
Sure.
And certainly, I guess the integrated pest management strategy plays into the whole equation as well. And I'm sure we'll be getting an update on that again soon.
Oh, yes, yes, most definitely. I wouldn't want to leave it out.
All right. Okay. Any other questions on the wildlife hazard assessment? All right. Thanks for that excellent presentation.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
And that takes us to item 9, the director's report.
Just a few things this evening. Our passenger traffic, as you notice, I hope you have the list. We are down the month of August 13.2% over the same month last year. That really is the amount that we calculated for American Eagle when they left. That's the amount we indicated. Year-to-date, however, we're just down 4.7%, but both are of concern. Airport operations are also down 2% overall. Want to call your attention to the annual recruitment for advisory committees. We have 3 airport commissioners' terms that are coming up this December, and 2 of those positions need to be city electors, and 1 can be outside the city. So I urge you to consider and apply or contact other individuals who may have an interest in supporting the airport and providing some good advice. The Aircraft Rescue and Firefighting Service study, as you know, we will have a joint meeting with Airport Commission and Police and Fire Commission next Wednesday, the 24th, here in the airport conference room at 6 p.m. So we will be receiving a report from the consultant on that study and the recommendations that he has made for us. Also on the master plan, to call your attention that we are currently getting information from our sub-consultants on the historic structures report and also the traffic study. Once those studies have been edited with airport staff comments, just to get that done, then we will be bringing those to Airport Commission for presentation, just so to keep you up to date as how we're doing with the master plan and our environmental process. That concludes my comments, unless you have questions of either Tracy or I.
The electrical rehabilitation, you have that as an item.
That electrical, we have the contract with Mead and Hunt to do the assessment, and based on the assessment, then they'll do design, and that will be our next FAA grant, correct, Tracy? Yeah, we'll put it into our application that goes in this December.
After American left, I believe that United increased the size of a number of their aircraft. Have their load factors been satisfactory with the larger aircraft?
Somewhat. The load factor for the Los Angeles service is in the mid-70s. By contrast, load factor going to Denver's in the high 90s or mid-90s. But on the other hand, they did increase the size of the aircraft to compensate for that. So, but it's in the 70s. They will be making a change too. United will be making a change. I believe it happens December 3rd, if I'm correct, where they'll discontinue the 5:45 a.m. flight and for a period of time. That one goes away, I think, until March, then they'll bring it back. But, so we'll go from 6 flights to 5 flights to Los Angeles. And the reasoning, just so you'll know, they said that on the load factor going down to LA at 5:45 in the morning, it was full. However, there was no one in LA coming back to Santa Barbara at 6:30 in the morning. So they needed to do some changing of equipment, and they could use that aircraft in another market more efficiently. So that's why they pulled it.
Any questions on the director's report? All right. Well, with that, then we are adjourned.
We are. We'll see you next
right.
Wednesday.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.